Hello students, welcome to EPG Patashala. I am Dr. K.R. Ramamohan, Associate Professor and Head Department of Anthropology, Sikkim University. Today we are going to discuss a module on voluntary initiatives, development and welfare movements in 19th and 20th century. This model comes under the paper Indian Anthropology. So before we go this module, let us see what are the learning objectives. To know about the voluntary initiatives, development and welfare movements, particularly in 19th and 20th century in Indian society. To know about the leaders and the movements which brought change in the society during 19th and 20th century. To understand the importance of women's emancipation and education. To know about the anti-caste, class, untouchability and tribal movements. Let us understand what are these voluntary initiatives which leads to development and welfare. If we look at the whole history of India, particularly the 18th and 19th century, there were so many movements which come across many parts of India. And why did these movements arise? And who are the people who started these movements? What was the rationale behind in starting up these movements? Why did they do? The aim of these movements or initiatives is to bring a radical change in society and to empower people. It is also understood in a sense that a sensitization process about people's cultural practices, their opinions and attitudes. So in the later years, particularly with the emergence of industrial revolution in entire Europe, which simultaneously give the political ideas of equality, assertion of human rights, which are basically aimed towards to promote social welfare. These initiatives were started with the people who are deeply concerned for humanity. And these intellectual groups, thereafter, after polarizing, would start to take up using and questioning several issues of social concern. With that kind of a similar development would started in Europe, even in Indian society, we had such kind of intellectuals who are committed to bring a social change, to bring many reforms, questioning the social order, questioning the prevailing attitudes and beliefs which are deeply ingrained in people's minds. And such social action groups began taking shape in the early 19th century. And we can say that this is some form of a socio-cultural regeneration in the 19th century, where India was under the rule of colonial masters. So even though at one parallel India is being governed by the British, People are fighting for freedom, freedom from the British rule. Simultaneously, when people are bothered for this independence from the foreign rule, ideas of social reform have also taken a greater shape. Along with this national sentiment, the formation of many intellectual movements which started in all parts of India. And the most famous were the Brahma Samaj, Arya Pratinidhi Sabha, Arya Samaj, Prarthana Sabha, and the Indian Social Conference. All these movements had one particular agenda, is to bring some social change in people's thinking process, questioning the moral and social order in that point of time. So the important social thinkers, the social reformers are Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Keshav Sen, Dayananda Saraswati, Jyotiba Phule, Madhav Govind Ranade has taken the leadership, led from the front to bring some kind of change and to reform people from the clutches of age-old practices. And these movements started questioning the important social issues like the social bigotry, the unequal status of women, the prevailing rigid caste system, and many irrational social practices which people were practicing, and people are divided on these attitudes. We could also see other movements like the Ahmadiyya and the Aligarh movements, the Singh Sabha and the Rehumai Majadisian Sabha represented the spirit of freedom and reform among all the Muslims. Parallelly, the Sikhs and the Parsis have also started separate intellectual movements. Now, Indian society is basically understood by its deep-rooted practices based on religion. So, religion being a dominant ideology which is prevailing in people's social practices, it influenced the growth of reform movement in the country. But by and large, contemporary social action groups were inherently driven by the intellectual and rational intentions. So they created organizational structures which were solidly based on social support and participation. Starting with this social reform movements by the intellectuals in several parts of India, we need to understand how the union government has taken some initiatives after post-independent period. So the union government in its national policy, because ours is a welfare state, on the voluntary sector, which was formulated by the Planning Commission and approved by the Union Cabinet in the year 2007, stipulates that the voluntary organizations, or VO, mean to include organizations which are engaged for the good of public service, and these organizations are based on ethical, cultural, social, economic, political, religious, spiritual, and mostly philanthropic, and to some extent scientific and technological considerations. So the VOs, or the voluntary organizations, are both formal in structure and informal in structure. They come in two ways, and each having their own agenda. And we can see a range of voluntary organizations, such as the community-based organizations, which work in the grassroots level, in villages, in tribal areas, in urban areas, in the slums, or the displaced people, human rights groups. There's a range of voluntary organizations. And the non-governmental development organizations, or sometimes this is also called as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which are deeply committed to bring change and development and welfare of all the marginalized groups, of all the deprived classes. And each NGO have a specific objective, be it women's empowerment, child rights, elderly, disabled, working for the development of education, working for the development of economic sector. And we can also see there are many charitable organizations which they are liberal in granting funds, and some of the business organizations which they commit to offer funds for the development in various sectors. And we can also see there are organizations who are basically good in networking, in linking people who are not reachable. With these linkages, they disseminate both knowledge and other services. Most of the voluntary initiatives had been started with a missionary zeal by the Christian missionaries which have come to Northeast India. During the British time, there were few Christian missionaries who wanted to bring change in the most remote areas of the Northeast. They started doing this charity work, particularly in the areas of health, education, and this selfless service has brought significant changes by these efforts and initiatives taken by the Christian missionaries in some parts of India. Parallelly, there are other voluntary initiatives which are based on intellectual reform movements. Particularly, the noteworthy is Ishwarchand Vidyasagar was deeply committed to bring some kind of change for the status of women, particularly Hindu women. Vidyasagar conceived that unless women not given education, there is no development in the society. So Vidyasagar's effort were centered around the rights of women, that women should be given formal education. Only then there will be equal status and inequalities will be rooted out in the prevailing society. He vehemently fought for to ban the practice of sati, where the widow burning. Because of Vidyasagar's efforts in bringing that education should be given to women, it is also seen in the British administrators with the efforts of Wood. In the famous Wood's dispatch, the British ruler has immensely stressed the importance of that Indian society, particularly women, should be educated way back in 1860s. So the real impetus started with Wood's dispatch on the education. And the most remarkable social reform movement and to take India forward, Mahatma Gandhi not only committed for involved in the freedom struggle, but he was also cognizant of various social issues were crippling Indian society. He wants to bring a radical change in the people's attitudes, in the people's social practices, and he wants to root out the practice of untouchability in the Hindu caste system. Mahatma Gandhi envisaged a society where people have the complete freedom and they're self-reliant. And he wanted to liberate the village, and he said that Gram Swaraj, that every village is independent and they should not be dependent. And he advocated the small scale industries which are occupation based, which are being given by the caste lines. He wished for a society where there are free of inequalities. Gandhi was successful not only in fighting with the British, but he could bring many attitudinal changes among people by using people's realities. Gandhi wanted that the status of women should be improved by allowing them for formal education. Gandhi wanted a self-reliance governance in each and every village unit. Gandhi's efforts have been in many aspects of social spheres, like the village economy, the governance, and he questioned certain practices which are creating barriers for human development. Along with Ambedkar, he wanted to fight the whole prevailing caste system in Indian society, which has given social divisions among people. He wanted to bring certain reforms that people should not be divided on the artificial lines of caste system. And Ambedkar's social reform movement, that he says that caste should be annihilated. And caste system is the biggest block for social development in Indian society. He fought against the practice of untouchability, which is dehumanizing. And he questioned the unity of India. If these things are not there, how the society of India can be united? Because people are segregated on the basis of caste system. He wanted to empower these deprived classes, the marginalized groups, which have been the victims and suffered a lot in the hands of the dominant caste groups for centuries. You want to emancipate with this evil social practice in the rigid social structure, that there is no mobility for these people for ages. These initiatives made some kind of change among people with their efforts, with a deep ingrained committed towards humanity. So the liberation movement has started with these efforts. And in the Western India, we have Ranades initiatives towards widow remarriage, that fighting for the status of women, that fighting for the equal rights of women and the dignity for women in Hindu society. And Jyotiba Phule's works on that all the masses should be educated, questioning the prevailing age-old practices of divisions among people through caste system. And he started a movement to and sensitize people that they are denied freedom, that they are denied equal opportunities in education, in employment, in social sphere, in the governance issues. So at various points of time, both in the late 19th century and early 20th century, we could see all the efforts and initiatives of the great intellectual social reformers like Raja Ramohan Rai, which fought for the evil practices in Hindu society. Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar, who want to abolish certain practices which dehumanize particularly women in Hindu society. We have Ranade's commitments towards widow marriages, intercaste marriages, to break these artificial boundaries of caste system. And Jyotiba Phule's movements towards empowerment of these backward classes, to give an equal share with other social groups in India. Even after the post-independent period, in Tamil Nadu, there is the Dravidian Kajagam movement, which questioned the influence and dominance of Aryan culture. They want to stress that the importance of Dravidian culture, and they want to assert their own rights. All these initiatives have one thing in common. First, they want to emancipate all these social classes into the next level. At the same time, they want to empower women who are denied the opportunities of education, who are denied the opportunities of widow remarriage, and they want to give an equal space for women in every social and cultural sphere. Today what we have is the efforts and initiative by these great social reformers, which they had in mind to bring the renaissance in Indian society, which were deeply ingrained with the religious ethos and guided by the principles of dogmatism. They have a vision for a better society. They have envisioned that society should be principled and should have a foundation of equality, where all citizens are equal in every aspect, and they should be given complete freedom and autonomy to control their own lives, which are being socially excluded, these groups, for centuries. And these initiatives have led a platform to develop into further aspects which brought them significant changes in social reality. So in that sense, we could also see the various tribal movements which have taken place in many parts of India during 19th and 20th century. There were various numerous upsprings of tribals have taken place beginning in Bihar in 1772, followed by many revolts in Andhra Pradesh, Andaman Nicobar Islands, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Mizoram and Nagaland. So the important tribes involved in the revolt in the 19th century were the Mijos in 1810, the Kols in 1831, the Mundas 1889, the Daflas, Kasi and Garo, the Santals, the Mariagons, Nagas, the Kons. Now Guru pointed out that the complex history of migration in the subcontinent and the close relatives of cultural similarities between tribal groups and other religious groups has given some kind of movements which are based on the movements seeking political autonomy and the formation of separate states. In the case of Nagas, Mijos and Jharkhand, there were many agrarian movements and movements based on forest related issues and forest related resources. There were movements based on socio-religious and socio-cultural movements. The Bhagat movement among the Bhils of Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, movements among tribes of South Gujarat, the Raghunath Murmu's movement among the Santals. So being understood these initiatives in the late 19th and in 20th century in the Hindu society and the tribal movements in the tribal pockets of India, those are various tribal movements like the Naga Revolution, which started in 1948 and continued up to 1972, where there is a movement called the Naga insurgency, and the Mizo movement, we call it as the guerrilla warfare, which ended the formation of Meghalaya state in 1970, which are created out of Assam and Mizoram. The Gonds of Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra wanted for a separate state. And we could also see the Naxalite movement in various states like West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and to some extent the agrarian movements of the Gonds and Bhils in Madhya Pradesh, and the forest-based movements, especially by the Gonds, for getting customary rights on the forests. So The tribal unrest and the resultant movements are basically centered around only for liberation. To summarize, of all the initiatives, the movements which have started in the beginning of 19th century till 20th century and still the movements are going on, is fundamentally understood with the concepts of oppression, inequality, injustice, discrimination, social exclusion, marginalization, the hegemonic practices impinged upon the vulnerable groups, which clearly makes us to understand that historically all the groups have suffered and have been oppressed as second-rate citizens in many spheres of life. With the efforts of Christian missionaries in one hand, and when nationalist movement was going on to fight the British rule and to emancipate for freedom, there are also several movements parallelly ran in Indian society to liberate these various social groups. Particularly, the initial movement started with Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Ranade, Jyotira Phule. All gives one understanding that they wanted to bring social change. They want to reform the whole Indian social system to bring it more equal society. And in the early part of 20th century, we have seen the great intellectual movement started by Gandhi and the initiative taken by Ambedkar to root out the age-old practices of untouchability and to emancipate all the deprived classes. So, taking all these initiatives, reform movements, fundamentally aimed at to bring a society on the principle of egalitarian, equality, individuality, humanity. And this has been continued even after the post-independent period. Various movements have started. Even in tribal societies, where there were upsprings of social unrest, in many tribal pockets in India, where they are fighting for their justice, and even in the contemporary times.